I'm here about some monkeys. Monkeys? Yeah, 12 of them. So Jesus, just like Jeffrey, had 12 apostles in the Bible. And Terry Gilliam, the producer of this movie, is very well versed in philosophical matters, as is obvious from the depth and the philosophical content in most of his movies, that I've seen at least. So 12 Monkeys is kind of like the same thing as the Never-Ending Story, which is the story of all religious books. Is a story of the sun god going through the astrological signs in his journey across the sky, and it's all been proven. So Jeffrey is basically the mind behind the revolution against the shitstem in place, and he wants to free the animals who are all currently locked up in cages, and he refers, I believe, to the human species in general, which has been entrapped by this priesthood, Jezebel, Ahab, pathocracy, you know? So, one interesting thing I heard recently was from the guy Knowledge is Power, a YouTuber. He said that who is the most qualified soldier to fight against the system, right? And he said, since the system uses sex, and the system is based on Jezebel and Ahab and so forth, and their mindsets, so the best soldier who can go up against this evil force in the spiritual battle, which the Bible and other religious books talk about, the best person would be an Enoch, somebody who is completely impervious and free from the vice of lust, someone who has no sexual organs, and therefore he can resist the charms that the priesthood will throw at him, and through the Jezebels that it provides a sustenance from, you know, the whore of Babylon. So yeah, the eunuch is the best person who can destroy Jezebel. So in that sense, that one scene in 12 Monkeys where he gives him the key, and he's like, monk, key, get it? Like the monk is the key to make man free, like the monkey. Because currently man is being engineered to be like a machine man, completely detached from himself. So in the last video, I talked about how 12 Monkeys is good to show you why girls like bad boys, you know? But it wasn't just about that, it was about spiritual love, you know? Because the lady represents the divine feminine, and the man represents the nada, you know? Shiva, which is complete silence, the complete void, you know? From which everything emerges. So that he represents Nada, like in They Live, John Nada, but that's what Bruce Willis represents in this movie. And I believe Jeffrey represents kind of like Jesus, with the 12 apostles, 12 monkeys, and so forth. Now, there's many interesting themes in this movie, you know. I'll talk about the bad boys thing later, but one of the main themes in this movie is like where we see the fight of good versus evil, what that I talked about earlier, which Michael Sarion calls sage versus psychopath. Um, so a lot of little revelations are given, and sometimes in a comical way, sarcastic almost kind of way, facetious kind of way, like when Jeffrey gives his little diatribes. Even at the end of the movie, when Bruce comes back to him, he talks about how non-profit organizations are actually sinister cabals who want to exterminate the world population and so forth. Yeah, Jeffrey is kind of like the Jesus speaking the truth in this movie, and Bruce Willis is more like the active man. He's kind of going out into the world trying to figure things out, trying to solve this problem. Based on the fact that he knows about the future. He is from the future because he knows what the future is going to be. And unfortunately, the timing that he's currently in, things aren't perfect. He doesn't arrive at the right time. He doesn't do things at the right time. But still, things somehow manage to pull together at the end. Now, Bruce is interesting because he's like the perfect candidate for a red pill process, like Neo Anderson. He's the perfect guy for that because Bruce kind of, he says it himself. The scientists choose him because he has a very strong memory. He has a very good memory. So he can capture a lot of information, absorb it, and then later connect the dots and make it all work, the puzzle clear. So Bruce Willis is basically, complete blank slate, but also has those qualities of strong memory and a strong mind. So he can withstand the brutality of the information war that he's about to enter. So that's why he's chosen, Bruce Willis. He has a perfect kind of innate qualities of strength, of the mind especially, and good memory. Because memory is how you red pill yourself, really. Because if you go outside, you can get tricked. But if you go through your own memory, then you know for sure that what they're saying is true, and you'll come to new realizations too. So we see Bruce going through the red pill process through the movie, and interesting thing about why girls fall for bad boys is it's like frame. It's very important to be in control of your own mind because being masculine is being independent, being self-reliant, and so forth, and powerful, especially with the strategies and so forth, intellect, logic. So that's what Bruce represents in the movie. But see, he's coming from a different world. He's coming from the future, so he has a different frame of reality. His whole sense of reality is different, and that's what intrigues the psychologist, who's having dick thrown at her every few minutes, like Chris Rock says. But still, she finds this person who superficially seems like a complete disgusting animal, And why is this woman falling for this disgusting animal, like these MGTOW guys talk about, giving surface details about these guys and acting like there's something wrong with women, even they don't see the whole big picture, And that's what this movie kind of shows, is that this guy is in his own frame of reality, his own frame of reference. And one thing I learned from David D'Angelo is how to attract women is like with his Double Your Dating book and series and information. He taught me a lot, actually. He's the first guy who got me into movies to learn more about gender and stuff. Way back in college when I was reading him in 2003, 2004. And a year after I lost my virginity, which is why I started reading the book, I still continued reading it a little bit. But I was pretty much MGTOW after losing my virginity. I was like, I can't even attract the girls that are attractive to me. And well, at least they don't stick around very much, and they're all flying around. So it's like, what's the point, of trying to make yourself more and more attractive and more money and all this stuff when, I mean, the basic stuff, you should be able to attract a plain looking girl at least, even though you're just a college guy. I don't know. At least that's the way the society makes it seem that you should be able to. But Bruce as a young guy can attract, Bruce as an old guy can attract the most desirable professional woman out there. So yeah, they're definitely lying to you about the age factor and the differences in age between women and men, because just like in that movie Eric the Viking, in these kind of matriarchal societies, it's like men kind of just act like women and act. I guess they're not as, they don't assume that there's any differences. It's kind of like the whole Plato's model of the Republic, which is this androgynous society, whereas his teacher Aristotle believed in understanding and exaggerating the differences between the sexes. So he was against Plato in that sense. And so am I. But I'm more like Socrates, because I dare to go where people don't like, for the sake of education, for the sake of educating others. So yeah, the monk has a key, and there's 12 monkeys in this movie. But yeah, David D'Angelo, he had this thing called he used to do this whole new age kind of stuff too. So he would have this whole positivity kind of affirmations. So he would say stuff like, so for this one, creating your own frame of reference and staying in that reference and inviting the female to your frame of reference to maintain, that positive, attractive presence. So it's like this movie shows in a brilliant way how the man has to maintain that frame of reference, because the woman is coming from a totally different reality, which is a dangerous reality, which is going to destroy the world kind of reality, for which Terminators get built and sent back into the past. Yeah, that was an interesting scene. In the end, he cracks, but that's just because he's going through that whole phases, of the red pill process, of different levels and different realities and all that stuff. So confusion, basically. But she, at this point, has already, fell head over heels for not just him, but his mission, which is what Christianity and the Bible tries to say, is that God is the supreme and in charge, where the governments are an earthly representation of him, but the conscience inside you should be the ultimate representation of it. And then man comes next in terms of authority, and then woman comes next, and then child after that, That's how the world is set up. That's how natural law dictates things should be. And when we fall away from that, we create all kinds of deviancies and confusions, and men nowadays are still paying women and giving them what they want, but they're not getting what they want from the woman, or what they need at least. Case in point is the OnlyFans, where women get to be attention whores and men get to fund their crazy narcissism. And society destructing narcissism, no less. So that's why we need more eunuchs, more MGTOW guys, to be able to fight these Jezebels, because shit is crazy out there. So the actual main character, Bruce Willis, he's basically a MGTOW guy. He doesn't he doesn't care about the drugs and the pussy, like in that scene they talked about. There's a lot of drugs and sex in the '90s, obviously, but he's just about his mission, you know. He's a real MGTOW, a red pill guy, because he's actually black pill, just like, or Jeffrey is at least, but yeah, he's just going out in the world trying to figure things out, trying to solve the problem, and that's his main mission, you know. Even though the girl is there tempting him, but he tries to stay until the end. He tries to stay on the straight and narrow, and stay focused on his mission. And then he thinks of the girl once he's done with his mission, you know, which is how it should be. So yeah, he doesn't even have sex in the whole movie, but he's still the most desirable male, and he's a MGTOW and all that stuff, red pill guy, going through trying to solve the issues of the world. So yeah, that was maintaining his he maintained his frame, and you know, was the leader, and she was happy to follow, even though she had chances to escape and so forth. But I guess she became a believer too, in God or whatever. Okay, and another thing is like how the scientists, they all think Jeffrey is the bad guy, right? And they think the army of the 12 monkeys is what destroyed the world. But they're actually the good guys. They're the guys in the light. And that's funny how they always get framed and scapegoated for the actions of the evil people, which are actually the majority, because their followers can be counted as evil people too. So yeah, so Jeffrey, everyone thinks Jeffrey is the bad guy until the end, when they realize it's just the scientist's assistant, the number two of the scientist, which means the whole organization itself is, like Jeffrey said, a sinister cabal intent on destroying the world, or destroying the human species, at least, except them. So yeah, that's what we see, and we see how in the end the scientist is in league with the other scientists who are supposedly underground in the future, fighting this to bring the human race, save the human race, basically. So that, I believe, represents kind of like the underground Illuminati, military strategies, futurists, and people who are planning the future, you know, and working against people like Jeffrey, I guess, or controlling the whole society, basically, you know, and managing the whole society. So that's what the scientists represent, and Bruce is just one of the qualified prisoners, I guess, who's completely under mind and physical and time control, and therefore he's used. But he also is from the same side as Brad Pitt is. So he is a human. He's not a psychopath, control freak. So he wants freedom, and he wants all the beauty of life, and so forth. So yeah, all those things are shown beautifully in that movie too. And about gender, I already talked about maintaining your frame and so forth, and always keeping your own mission first, you know, because ideally your mission is not serving yourself, it's serving others. That's what Bruce does as a man. He's not there to, you know, escape the prison, because he even though he thought, he gets weak at later points, and the woman makes him weak, really. His love and so forth, his attachment to the things of the world is what makes him weak. So then he wants to kind of, you know, just stay there and not go back to the future where he's a free man and he could probably be a king or whatever, or at least a hero. So yeah, he gets weak, but he maintains that his mission as a priority towards the end, till the end. but he gets killed, obviously, because evil just has too much force, you know? Evil is basically female, you know, because if you think of male, male represents the conscious being, whereas female is kind of like the unaltered state of human beings. The whole, so they're more vulnerable to the evil force in the world. Therefore, they're followers. Therefore, they, just like that guard who wouldn't let her and her boyfriend through to stop the terrorists from releasing that bioweapon throughout the world. In that same way, the whole world was set up against these two, you know. But there was a little boy who was actually him in the past, but actually another little boy from the future too, just like 1984, the 1,000-year war for the truth to come out. So yeah, the story continues, you know. But there's very few people on the good side, is what they're trying to show in that movie, and what the Bible also showed you. Yeah, but the cycle continues, you know. The boy watches the plane go off, and he knows that there's more shit to face in the future. And speaking of the future, I have a list of movies that are more futuristic and sex-based, or gender-based, actually. Talking about genes. 12 Monkeys also has some interesting quotes on genes and germs. So it's like, they just mentioned how germs were not a thing until like a couple 100 years ago, and suddenly everyone is scared of them. But there's still people who don't even believe in germs and think it's just a conspiracy theory set up by the system to push its agenda and its products and so forth, which is interesting in this current time. I can totally relate to the fact that germs is used as a boogeyman, and science in general is used as a boogeyman, and people don't understand the truth in the science, and therefore these marketing people and these power-hungry psychopaths who control the media, they use false science, fake, just like fake news. They use fake science in order to control society, you know. So Jeffrey gets philosophical in terms of the whole germ theory. And Demolition Man talks about the future in a world where everyone is obsessed with germs, and people won't even want to have sex or make out with each other because it's like people will be afraid of catching some germs, you know. Instead of realizing about the immune system and how it actually works, and herd immunity is what they call it, because the more exposure you have to the different environmental pollution out there, the more you'll be able to withstand the different pollutants out there. So the more you interact with people and catch germs, the more your body will be able to fight germs, and therefore you'll be able to be healthier in the long run. So that's an interesting thing that a lot of MGTOW guys are kind of in the same vein of, you know, this whole purity sense of things, hyper obsession with purity of the sexual partner, for example. Whereas in the 90s, we were all happy that these girls are becoming sluts and not prudes. Or at least in the 2000s. So 12 Monkeys, talking about germs. many other movies that talk about germs and the future of the scientific thing, just like the Brave New World, the scientific control over reproduction. Gattaca is one of the best ones in that regard. It's a futuristic society where it's this guy and this girl, so there's a love story too. But it's in a society like Demolition Man, where everyone is hyper concerned with the genes and pollution of their genes. So everyone who is looking to date somebody tries to steal their DNA, like through hair samples or something, and then they get it tested to see if they have those diseases which will make them bad partners. And it's illegal, but everyone does it, and so that's interesting. And there's also some kind of laws having to do with these genes, and people get in trouble for having the bad genes or something, or trying to help people who have bad genes or something like that. Code 46, I think that's the one where bad genes are bad, or the system is hacked basically. The control factor of the system is hacked through the underground forces of freedom. Gattaca, Code 46. What else? Soylent Green is just a future dystopic greeny society. Brazil is another similar one. I already mentioned it many times. It's good to notice how they label terrorists in that movie, and anyone can become a terrorist because of the boogeyman being promoted by the media, you know? So it's funny, the female in this movie, Brazil, is more of a terrorist and more of a rebel than the male, you know, who is totally scared because he's raised in the system and his family's in the system, so he's like totally surrounded, you know? And Gattaca, also interesting, Gattaca, because it talks about this whole race concept, the race of the survival of the fittest, and he and his brother are in this race in this movie, and yeah, the whole scientific evolution of the species thing is touched in there. Vanilla Sky is another movie I saw, which seemed to be about sex and MGTOW kind of guy, or at least an incel kind of guy, and how he found love and stuff. It seemed to be very red pill. It was so abstract I couldn't understand it. Kind of like Eternal Sunshine of a Spotless Mind, you know? Or 2001, or The Life of Pi. It was so visual and so abstract, just like Wicker Man too. But that's another form of learning, you know, another form of communication that people are very weak at today. Even though they spend all this time in front of the screen, they don't happen to have the understanding of the art, art history, and analyzing art as a method of conveying information, the 1,000 words. Dark City is another dystopic kind of reality movie. Eyes Wide Shut, my God, that's another interesting movie, talking about the secret societies and sex and the sisterhood and the brotherhood and how they're different in the secret societies and what philosophies they have and how the whole class system is creating a whole lot of snobbery and a whole lot of callousness in our human society, you know? Because the lady, the girl who's the special version or the special sex goddess, just one of them, she's basically killed off, you know, just to send a signal to somebody. And she doesn't have a very good character, just because of the fact that the world is very inhospitable place, inhumane place, so people have to escape with drugs. So she's into drugs too, and her life is pretty dark. So that's Eyes Wide Shut. and shows the whole class system and how women are so vulnerable in the class system. You see that in Eyes Wide Shut through the eyes of this and the statements of his wife. And the Eyes Wide Shut also has an interesting scene where they talk about marriage, where the guy who tries to seduce her at the party, the sex party, or the first party, actually, that they go to, the high class party. So the high class guy tries to seduce her, and the old guy tries to seduce her, and tells her the marriage used to be just a social contract, but the sexual world was totally different from the marriage world. And then she reveals her frustrations over in the past to her husband over sex, and how she's so she can be so flaky. She has thought of being flaky in the past and ditching everything and monkey branching, so to speak. And he was just shocked, you know. Then he started going through the red pill process, and that's when, just like the Wicker Man, these Satanists try to manipulate him and play with him and so forth, and lead him down trails, which is what YouTube red pill guys could also be doing, which is what I said in my previous video, where people act like, oh, MGTOW is just totally innocent and there's no corruption in the philosophy, and you cannot corrupt it because it's just a philosophy, you know, when that's where the real battle is. So yeah, Brave New World, 1984 also talks about the scientific manipulation. You know, 1984, you can see it in the movie too, the British version in 1984, released as a tribute. But yeah, that's how the scientists and the big brother is manipulating men and women relationships are given some examples in that story, book, and movie, just like They Live. These are not fictions, these are documentaries. Now I can't even read my writing because I wrote it so small. Name of the Rose is another movie where they talk about the different, the sexual vulnerability of young females in this so-called patriarchy. But it's just a Jezebel Ahab pathocracy, or priesthood, basically, that runs this world, Eyes Wide Shut style. So Name of the Rose talks about the occulting of information and archives, keeping it away from the public, and but then there's people like us who are always trying to go underground and figure it all out. Great Expectations is another very red pill, not MGTOW, but a very red pill kind of movie. I saw the old version of it. Many of those black and white movies have a lot of reality about human nature, which started changing after the whole modernization of Hollywood and the military takeover of Hollywood too, after the World Wars and Vietnam War and all that. But in the 80s and 90s there were some good movies that came out. Most of these are probably released in that years. Movies like Running Man, Logan's Run. Oh yeah, Logan's Run and Running Man. They're also talking about this whole death cult. The system, because sex is like, the French say this. Sex, another word for sex or orgasm is le petit morte, which means the little death, because sex and death is very connected. You see in the animal kingdom too, sex and death is very connected. Violence and sex is connected. And for example, when a new lion takes over, and takes over the old lion and kills the old lion, he also kills the cubs or the children of the old lion, so the old system cannot come back, and he has no threats. And the woman, and the female tiger, lion, just like watches her kids get killed, and she just spreads her legs, and the whole process starts over, you know, because males and females are very different, because the species and the biology of our species are very precise, having to do with our survival and our continuation and our healthy regeneration. So that's why women don't understand men and men don't understand women, because there has to be a little bit of mystery in there, because nature is a very mysterious force. So yeah, there were those movies I was talking about with the genes. Another interesting movie about red pilling is The Village. And you see how the kids are kind of put in this fairy tale world, and then they're put through these scary red pill traumas almost, in order to, well, when they're ready to grow up almost, it seems, or when they're ready to go to the other side of the reality. So that's The Village, another interesting movie. Oh, Ninth Gate. Ninth Gate is a great red pill movie because it's about a guy and the whole red pill journey. And the guy is a kind of, I don't know if he's an incel, but he's definitely a MGTOW because he's all money over bitches. And he also is actually in the real red pill process, like real red pill process, because he's trying to find these books and stuff and the secret knowledge about the satanic ritual or something, or a satanic kind of transformation process. So yeah, he has there. It's him, which is like the red pill guy. Then there's Ahab, which is like the big Mason, the big worldly, godly kind of powerful figure, who is kind of his supervisor in a sense. And then there's also the Jezebel, who is a worship me kind of female, who believes that she is divine and she is a god and she is a leader over men, and she uses sex as a weapon and to control people, and she worships evil, worships fulfilling, the cult of immediate gratification, or the cult of immediacy, which what Atali talked about, the liberal pluralistic culture of today, of this market culture. So she's that kind of woman, and she's a Jezebel basically, and eventually she's thrown off her pedestal by, I guess, Ahab himself. But he's not Ahab, he's actually the priesthood. He represents the priesthood. The Ahabs are the guys she manipulates. In fact, the red pill guy was an Ahab earlier in the movie, when he becomes tempted by the sex she offers, which was just a weapon because she was just trying to find something from him. Just like today, whether it's money or status or power or whatever it is, or information. So guard your resources from females. That's what the whole concept of celibacy was about, at least in the Hindu book that I read about it. It's just about guarding your resources, because males do not have much support in this world, in this Jezebel, Ahab priesthood world. So they really have to protect, starting with the semen. But semen just represents what they contain, what the world is trying to get them to get rid of, For example, college, I shouldn't have gone to college, at least in the way that I did, but I was just out there chasing the carrot on the stick, not realizing the power I already had, which I was giving away to them by going to college. So in that same sense, that's what celibacy is about. Keeping your power, realizing your potential, and growing your potential, right? From Hell is another brilliant movie with Johnny Depp, just like Ninth Gate, which talks about sex and the vulnerability of the lower classes of females and why they go for the rich, beta bucks. And in fact, they don't have alpha fucks, but they do have alpha fucks. That's Jack the Ripper. He fucks them with his knife and kills them, which is true in a spiritual sense with these bad boys or whatever, the real psychopaths, which these women fall for when they're young, because they're so good with their manipulation, which is in a sense a form of prima nocta, where the higher class males get to run a train on your female before you get married to her. So that's what they mean by it's not your turn, it's just your turn. Little slave, it's just your turn. There are females. We get to run trains on them when we want. And then we give them leftovers to you, ones they've already been corrupted with our bad genes, with our with the micro-chimerism and so forth. So that's what this whole cock carousel, I think, is all about. And From Hell shows what they really think of these females, because the whole the Jack the Ripper is basically the priesthood, which is manipulating the whole Jezebel and Ahab forces in the world. And you see a lot of sexual information revealed there too, gender information and manipulation of sex information too. Johnny Depp the hero. And Zardos is another great movie talking about the old system of power, the rule of the order of force, which is where Zardos comes from. But he comes from that order, and he comes into the order of the matriarchy, which is the order of the money, I guess. Or maybe another matriarchy, I don't know. It's been a while since I've seen the movie, but I just remember it being very profound about gender, just like the 007 movies can be. So certain actors are show certain things. So 007 actually shows you in Zardos a lot of gender and civilizational forces having to do with gender in Zardos. Yeah. Now I can't read a couple names. Minority Report is another good one. It does have some things about gender, I believe, but also the whole technological, the enemy of our sexual unions is this whole technological priesthood today, and we see the priesthood in action in Minority Report. And for my Indian fans, I want to say there's Mother India, which I thought was very feminist kind of movie, and it kind of shows the whole feminist system very plainly almost, although it is very abstract, because you have to make certain, it's very analogical. The story is shown in an analogical sense, like your mother is not out to kill you, maybe only mentally and psychologically, but I guess if you stray too far from the feminist imperative, then she would call the cops on you and kill you in that sense. So yeah, it shows, the Mother India shows this whole Jezebel Ahab priesthood in action. And the Jezebel, which is Mother India, is shown in a positive light. She's shown as the victim, even though she's single this whole time, even though she could have remarried and helped her children out, but she chose to remain single and wander the dark rivers and take favors from the rich men and so forth. So she's not shown as a prostitute, because that's totally no-no, but it's implied in the storyline. So she is a Jezebel, and she kills her own son. But then again, the priesthood manipulates the women to neuter their sons and raise their females to be dysfunctional Jezebels themselves and Delilahs themselves. So it's all shown there. And Three Idiots is another great red pill kind of movie, because the main character in that movie is a total black pill or red pill kind of guy, and his two friends are the guys he's kind of helping, and then there's also the guy on the other side who's a narcissist, and yeah, and then they show how the system destroys the kids, the young males, while growing up in college and so forth. After they're sent out into the world, how they're at the mercy of the world and totally crushed by the force and the weight of the world. And how why there's certain guys who are reserved from females too, because they have to protect their situation that they're currently in, which is what MGTOW is all about, protecting your current situation, which is a very dangerous situation, very vulnerable situation. You're at the mercy of the wind, and these females have no idea what you're going through, no idea what kind of mind you have and how it's different from your mind, and how you're at different, well, the fact that they're making life much harder for you, they don't seem to realize that. That's another thing. Whereas we can realize that we might have in the past done things that are not so agreeable to them, and we can change that. But they have their own feminist imperative, you know? The group mind is supreme for them. So yeah, I think I've made this almost an hour long. I've talked a lot about the movies, Das Experiment, 12 Monkeys, They Live, all kinds of movies. In my mega episode, number 15. Yeah, and if you can read it, I'll always put up the list, but I doubt you'll be able to read this, so later.